O Flashcampbrasil é realizado por Adobe e Action Creations. Patrocínio Platinum, BlackBerry Playbook. Patrocínio Prata, Velo Telecom. Patrocínio Bronze, Wacom, Influxes, Chambi, Reacycle, The Click. Apoio, Jornada Adobe, Tango, Alternativa Platform, O'Reilly, Abra Web, Rádio Jovem Pan, Faculdade Maurício de Nassau, Marca Viva TV, linda.com.
Então agora eu vou apresentar para vocês a última palestra. O GSkinner, para mim, eu sou um grande fã do trabalho dele, acompanhei o trabalho dele, já vi várias palestras dele lá nos Estados Unidos. Ele viaja o mundo inteiro palestrando, ele estava no Japão, na Nova York, Europa, e agora ele está aqui com a gente. As palestras dele são muito inspiracionais. Ele me falou que ele mudou a palestra de última hora, porque ele teve essa ideia de mudar a palestra. Eu tenho certeza que vai ser uma palestra bem bacana. Então, com vocês, um dos melhores developers do mundo aí, GSkinner.
Thank you very much. Can we bring the lights down so that my slides look pretty? Anybody? Light switch? There we go. Oh. So, I really want to thank Demian for bringing me down. I'm very honored to come down and speak to you guys. This is my first time in Brazil, and I'm really excited to meet with the local community and see what you guys have been working on. It's a great honor. Originally, I was going to be giving a talk called ADHD FTW LOL. And this is a talk that I've been running for the last maybe 6 months or so. I've given it 4 or 5 times. And when I delivered it in New York about a week ago, I realized that I was starting to get a little bit bored of it. And when I was walking down the street in Manhattan, I saw this store, and something about the store inspired an idea in me. And being inspired then inspired me to do a talk about inspiration. Convoluted, but true. So, the new talk that I'm going to be giving is called The Art of Being Inspired. It's a brand new talk. I've been working on it for just the last 3 days. Normally I spend weeks putting talks together, but this is something brand new and I'm hoping it goes well. So I apologize in advance if it's a complete mess. And again, this talk is inspired by inspiration. So I think one of the most important things that we need to keep in mind when we're trying to be creative and we're trying to maintain our interest in the technology and in our jobs, and we're trying to come up with new ideas all the time, is that there really aren't that many truly new ideas out there. Ideas tend to be built on top of old ideas. Innovation tends to be evolutionary and derivative. It almost never just springs from nothing. And this is something that's really important to keep in mind. And what it means is that our creativity is really fueled by inspiration. It's not this magical process where things just spontaneously appear in our mind. We need lots of little pieces of inspiration that we can use as a nucleus for our ideas to crystallize around, right? So that we can come up with cool new things that we can build. And so inspiration is really the driving force behind creativity. But I think that as we get older, we become more and more cynical. I think, we're born to be inspired. When we're young, we're so easily inspired. We see things and they're amazing to us, they're magical to us, and we have so much creativity. But as we get older, we learn to be cynical. We learn not to show the awe that we still feel. And I think that it's critical that we teach ourselves to return to this easily awed state where we can be very easily inspired. And think back to your childhood, the first time you can remember seeing oil on water. right? This very simple thing that we see all the time. And it's just beautiful. It's almost magical, the colors that come off of it, and how things move and how gorgeous it is. And now we kind of look at this and we're like, oh, it's pollution, it's gross. But to me, you know, looking at this, it's still very inspiring. It's actually the thing that inspired the background for my whole talk. And so there's these little things that as children we get very excited about, and as adults we just start to take for granted, and we stop seeing the magic that's apparent in everything that we do and everything that we see. So this talk is really going to focus around this idea of how do we regain our inspiration, our ability to be inspired, and how do we then apply that to the work that we do. So this is an old quote. It's often attributed to Picasso. And Picasso is actually one of my favorite artists. I'm not necessarily a really big fan of his art, but I love the guy as a person. He just was incredibly prolific. He did so much work. He played in so many different fields. He sucked at most of what he did. If you've ever seen Picasso's pottery, it's horrible. But this quote, I think most people really only see the superficial meaning of it, which is, you know, if you're a great artist, you steal things and you take it for your own. But I think if we look deeper into this quote, you can see more important meaning to this. Ideas aren't something that you can steal outright. They're something that you can transfer from person to person. And so to me, this quote is more about ownership. So you don't just want to borrow ideas from people and use them as that other person's idea. You want to internalize them, and you want to filter them through yourself. You want to own that idea and make it new, make it fresh, combine it with things that you already know, and create something amazing. So what this means is that, again, there are no really amazing new ideas or it's rare that amazing new ideas just pop into your head. So what we're talking about is the synthesis and extension of existing ideas, right? Taking existing ideas, combining them together, and extending them out. So we're not going to find ideas in safe, well-traveled places. We're going to find them on the outskirts of existing ideas and at the intersection of existing ideas. We're unlikely to find really amazing new ideas in places that look like this. That's just, I actually saved this image because I was like, wow, that looks like something that I could generate programmatically. I mean, who wants to live somewhere that looks like you could generate it on a computer? Gross. So, extending ideas, we want to extrapolate. We want to look backwards. We want to see what's been done before. We want to see what's being done now, and we want to extrapolate from that to see where we're going in the future. And our industry is one of the industries that can benefit from this the most, because we're really chasing the desktop, right? What's been done in interactive today has already been done 10 years ago with the desktop. And a very concrete example of this is Molehill with the Flash player, right? We're getting this 3D capability. Well, 3D has been on the desktop for 20 years. So we can look to see what did the desktop do with 3D, and we can guess what are going to be the best markets and the best places to play and to do business as this technology starts to become a reality. And this, I think, is true of just about everything in interactive today. We can really look at where things have been before to judge where they're going to go in the future. And I think good developers do this all the time, so that it almost becomes an intrinsic part of your personality. How many people have done scuba diving? So a few. It's not really important to the story. Last year, I went on a scuba trip with a couple of the smartest developers that I know. A guy named Brandon Hall, who is one of the granddaddies of our industry, and another guy named Ted Patrick, who is a really brilliant, prolific developer. And we went on this cave dive in Cancun, And we wound up in this cave where you could look at the ceiling and the floor, and you could see that chunks of the ceiling had fallen down and fallen onto the floor. And when I was in there, I started to formulate a plan for what I'd do if part of the ceiling fell down, right? I could see what had happened before. I was thinking, what would I do if this happened in the future? And when we were done, the three of us and the one other guy who was sitting around, who had come on our dive, who I believe was a lawyer, we started chatting, and I asked the other guys, so did you guys make plans for how you're going to escape from rocks falling from the ceiling? And Ted and Brandon, the two developers, immediately were like, oh yeah, I had this plan. I was going to get out this way, and this was how, you know. And the lawyer looked at us, and he was like, what is wrong with you guys? You're crazy. It never even occurred to me that rocks would fall from the ceiling. But to me, that just shows like how that mentality permeates you as a developer or as a creative person, where you're always analyzing what's going on and trying to figure out what's coming next and planning for what's coming next. Or we're just all really pessimistic. So the other place that we can look for new ideas is in between existing ideas, right? Take ideas that exist and find the space in between them. Find out where they intersect and try and come up with new concepts based on that. And this is something that I do all the time, both with other people's work, looking at what people have done that really inspire me, and also my own work, doing little experimental things, and also client work. I'm going to show you just a very simple example of this. Wow, that's really bright and blowing out. Of a couple of experiments that I played around with over the last year or two that I wound up recombining just to get something a little bit more interesting. So I'd say about a year and a bit ago, I put together this library that I called Wander. And basically all it does is it manages wander motion. And so you can see here we have this one main wandering object, the red one, and it's being chased by all of these faster but less agile wandering objects. And I built this and I thought, oh, this is kind of neat. The motion is kind of interesting. But I'd like to capture that motion and see what it looks like if I track it. So I did this little experiment where I basically just drew lines behind all of the movement. And you know, I kind of liked the white space in it, but it didn't really get me too excited. There's like a lot of complexity there, but there isn't much beauty. And so I kind of left this experiment behind. I walked away from it for a while. But at the same time, I was playing with a kaleidoscope class. And I'm not quite sure why I decided to build this, but I built it and I had this kind of boring demo using Perlin noise in the kaleidoscope. And it occurred to me that it could be interesting to combine this experiment with the other experiment. And so the result of that I actually wound up liking, and it's something that I might take a little bit further along. But basically we have this complexity, visual, of course it goes completely white. This is the fun of random systems. We have this complexity from the Wander class, and then we have symmetry that's introduced by the kaleidoscope class. And the human eye really likes both of those things. It likes complexity, but it also likes to see symmetry. And so I kind of like the result that came out of this. So again, combining different things to create something that's a little bit more interesting. Actually, I'm going to show you the next part of this because I think I'm doing good for time. A little bit later on, I decided if something's interesting in 2D, it must be even cooler in 3D. And so I built out a 3D version of this where basically the kaleidoscope is recreated on every 45-degree axis in the 3D space. And the minute that I saw this, it reminded me, as a child of the 80s, of artificial intelligence, because we all know that when the computers come to take over the world, they're going to look like this, right? So once I had realized that, I figured, hey, let's keep playing, let's push this a little further. And so I added AI mode. So this is friendly AI mode. I'm sorry, Dave. I can't allow you to do that. And then this is angry AI mode. Die, meat puppet. Thank you. And so I thought I was doing really good here. I thought I'd like come up with this great idea, and then I decided to go watch Tron, the new Tron, and I figured I'm going to go watch the old Tron again before I watched the new Tron. So I went back and I found the old Tron, and I got about 30 minutes into the movie, and I saw this part, and I realized I'm just just copying things out of my childhood. So this is where Jeff Bridges gets sucked into the machine, and here he goes. I was just ripping off stuff from 25 years ago. Horrible. But nothing is new, right? So I think another thing that's really critical here is ideas really have no value until they're recorded, right? I have tons of ideas, but I used to be really bad at actually capturing those ideas and actually getting them into some format that I could come back to them later. And so now a lot of people carry notebooks, like artist notebooks. I wish I was that cool. I mean, that's the cool thing to do. Instead, I carry my laptop and my iPhone everywhere. My laptop lives beside the bed when I go to sleep. And that way I can wake up at 2 in the morning with some random idea, completely annoy my wife, and just start typing out ideas or typing out a little bit of code or drawing something quickly. And that way I have that stored somewhere. That doesn't mean that I need to act on it right away, but it means that I can put it away for however long and come back to it later when I have some time to work on it, and I don't lose that idea, because it's so easy to lose ideas and then they're completely useless. Likewise, I mean, ideas don't have much value at all until they're realized, right? I mean, you can have tons of ideas, but until you actually start building something with them, they don't have a lot of value. And so as you come up with these ideas, or as you see cool things online or in life that really inspire you, it's important that you capture those things into a gallery, right? So curate an eclectic gallery of inspiration. So I keep a folder on my hard drive that's got hundreds and hundreds of different items in it that are just things that excite me or that interest me. And they might be technical, it might be an article on better coding. A lot of the time it's photos of nature or photos of things in life. But I want to show you a really small subset of this. So I just pulled a few things out. So, I mean, this is a X-ray of a stingray. Like, that's cool, right? It's cool. This is just some Japanese art that I love. I love this branch structure and the flowers. Maybe one day I'll recreate that. Jellyfish are awesome. I mean, that's amazing, right? Bayesian probability, so a little bit of math, you know. So this is just too cool to me. This is some guy had a, I hate slideshow mode. Pause. So some guy took this this like beekeeper's box, and he drilled a hole in the top of it, and he stuck, I'm not very good with technology, sorry. And he stuck this clear container on top of it, this glass container on top of it, and the bees built their hives up into this clear glass container And then he was able to like smoke the bees out of the container and have this perfect glass container with the honeycombs in it. Like, what does that have to do with technology? I have no idea, but I love it. I would love to do this one day. Just cool shapes. I mean, something I would love to do if I get access to a 3D printer one day. A library for working with Connect. Snow crystals. I love natural forms. This is an article on all the different types of snowflakes there are, and a little bit about the math of how they're created. Nebula. Space is awesome, inherently. Slime molds, which sound really gross, but they are just amazing. I mean, these colors and shapes are really cool. This is terrain in China, a USB missile launcher that maybe one day I'll do something with. So, I mean, just really random stuff. But when I wind up with free time and I'm not feeling very creative or I'm not feeling very inspired, I go back to that folder and I just flip through it randomly and I try and find something that sparks my interest, something that I can play with for a little while and get me feeling creative again. And there are lots of places that this inspiration can come from, and I'm going to share with you some of the places that I get inspiration and show you just a few really small experiments that I've done that have been inspired from different sources. So nature for me is huge. Both of my parents are biologists. I was raised in a family that, you know, the emphasis was always on the environment and nature, and so I draw a lot of inspiration from nature. And I'm going to show you just a really simple experiment, something that took me about 20 minutes. I had this video sitting inside of my inspiration folder for about 2 years or so. And one day I found myself with some time. I didn't know what I was going to do at that time. I was kind of bored. So I went back through, I found this video again. And this video always, I just find it amazing. So I'll show it to you and then I'll talk about it. So this is lightning shot at thousands of frames per second, so super slow motion. Holy shit, right? This is happening all the time. I mean, and it reminded me of the wander class that I had done, right? I had done this wander class, and I was like, man, that kind of looks like the stuff I've been doing. And so I took like 20 minutes. I took the wander class that I had already built, and I was able to put together nothing that's very pretty or that's very exciting, but something that just got me interested for a little while and got me thinking about something else and got me feeling creative again so that I could then go back to my normal work feeling inspired. And maybe, you know, maybe one day I'll come back and make this pretty and dress it up. But for me, all that was important was that this was something I could put together in 20 minutes and feel excited again. Another place that I like to draw inspiration is media, any type of media. I don't usually get my inspiration from the web itself, but I really like photos, I really like movies, movie titles, things like that. So I get a lot of inspiration from that. I want to show you, apparently I get inspiration from Tron from 25 years ago. But one of my favorite experiments that I've done just from a sort of visual perspective is a piece that I called Cut by the Wind. And it was actually, I think, based on something I had seen years before and hadn't really acted on. Am I on? Yes. Okay. That I hadn't really acted on, but I recently found the image that, that inspired it. So this is the original image. This is actually like a banner for some song that was in a soundtrack. And I wound up building this from it. And, you know, I just really like this. I think it's, you know, something that I spent some time on. I wound up getting really obsessed with how grass works and how to get grass to look really natural. And then her hair is actually grass upside down, which is reuse. So media. People. I mean, people are one of the best sources of inspiration, of course. But sometimes this inspiration can come from unexpected people. So recently, I have a little sister. She's 5 years younger than me. She's a wonderful girl, but she's also very cheap. And she recently bought a condo, her first home, and she came to me and she said, "I really want art for my condo." And I was like, "So buy some art." And she was like, "No, I don't want to spend the money. You make me art." And I was like, "I'm not an artist." But we wound up sitting down together and going through some of my old experiments. And and she saw this experiment and she said, "I like that. I like the way it moves." And I was like, "Well, when it's art on your wall, it's not going to move much." And so she was like, "Yeah, but I still really like that. Like, is there some way that we can work with that?" And so I started, again, trying to figure out how can I capture this motion. And this idea just sort of ballooned, and I just sort of worked on it for a few weeks after that until it turned into a full-scale application where I can basically load in any source image. So this is an image, a photo I took in Israel at a recent conference, and I can start painting over it. And in real time, I can like play with a lot of the different features here. So I can like change how much randomness there is in the color, and I can change how quickly it moves, and I can change the size of the pieces that it lays down. And it actually has like a, let me just clear this. It actually has a detail map, which I can adjust. So it automatically detects detailed areas of the photo and will lay down more detail in those sections. And it has a lot of manual control so that I can sort of paint with it. So I can tell it to follow my mouse, and then I can, at any time, pause it and restart it from another location. So it's a fairly simple piece, but it's something that I feel like I'm just starting to learn how to work with. And this is new for me. Like, I don't necessarily think this is becoming art yet. It's a little bit Notsky-ish, I guess, sort of like what the work that Eric Notsky does. But for one of the first times in my career, I feel like I'm spending more effort trying to learn how to use something that I built rather than just trying to figure out how to build it. You know, I feel like the tool is mostly done, but I don't feel like I'm necessarily a good enough artist to use that tool. And so I've been sort of playing around trying to teach myself how to make pretty things with this tool. And I'm just starting to get some results that I really like. And this outputs in really high resolutions so that I can do poster-sized art with it. So these are all just some, yeah, Darth Vader, right? I'm a nerd. I'm happy with it. Another place to look for inspiration, and there's no reason that you can't be inspired while doing the work that you do, but sometimes I find that my inspiration comes from work, and it drives back into my experimental work, and then it inspires my commercial work, and I create this cycle between the things that I do for play and the things I do to be interested and the work that I'm getting paid to do. And so I want to show you guys an example of that. A couple of years ago, we were contacted by Adobe to build this masthead for the Adobe cookbooks. And they had this idea of these circles that would fly in from the sides and collide with each other and ultimately form this cluster in the center. And so I started working on a circular collision engine. I mean, there were physics engines out there like Box2D, but I had never actually written a collision engine, and I kind of wanted to do it just to have the experience and understand how they worked. And I also wanted something that was really lightweight, that was very specific to just doing circular collision. And so I started working on it, and then the client, as clients tend to do, they changed their mind, and they decided, we don't really want this circular collision thing, instead we want something that's more like circular packing. And so I changed gears and finished off the project, and they were happy, but I had this circular collision engine sitting around that I didn't have anything to do with it. So I decided that I'd just start playing with it, right? And so I initially started by building, for the client, I started by building this test harness where I could just test whether or not the engine was working. I could put a bunch of circles on, I could collide them into each other, and I could see whether or not it was going to work, right? So very manual. And as I started to add features to this, one of the things that I added was radial velocity, so the ability for circles to push against each other. And in testing that, I thought it would be kind of neat to add music to it and have two of the circles act as fixed speakers almost, vibrating to the sound of the music. And I started to put together tests for that. So you can see here, this is circle test 3, 2 versions down, I had this. So simple concept. As I tend to do, I got obsessed with the idea and I started pushing it further. And you can see 5 versions later, circle test 10, I came up with this. So, in general, I like this, and this was sort of the culmination of the experiment. But the thing that really intrigued me was less this collision and more the lighting that I was starting to create, this lighting effect on the circles around the outside. And so I started out a new series of experiments just around that lighting. And again, I started with a test case where I could just play with it and see how things would work. And so you can see I now have shadows and things like glow through, right? The light comes through the different glass balls. And it's kind of a rule that if anything looks kind of cool, it's going to look a lot cooler if you put music to it. So, so I decided to do that. Interest of time, I'll just talk over this. So as I was working on this, I started to form this narrative, this story behind what this was showing. And I tend to be a little bit more story driven than maybe my work should be. So I basically came up with this story of this one creative individual driving against this storm of boring people and momentarily lighting up their lives and making it better. And I thought, you know, that was a pretty good story. But everyone else I showed it to saw bubbles. And I mean, okay, that's fine. Maybe a little bit more boring, but that's cool. And I was a little bit disappointed, but then, uh-oh, here we go. But then, shortly after completing this, we got a phone call from Coke. And they said, "Could you do bubbles?" And I said, "Fuck yeah." So basically, we packaged this thing up, sold it to them for a lot of money, and we were done. And it was, no, it took a little bit more work than that, but it was, it basically won us the contract instantly without having to do any real work to bid it. I travel a lot. I think travel is a great inspiration. I don't think you necessarily need to travel around the world to be inspired. I think you can get inspired just walking around your own neighborhood. I try and take a lot of photos. I try and really take in local culture when I can, because I think there's a lot that you can learn just traveling around and seeing different things. A lot of my travel tends to be around conferences, events like this, and invariably, anytime that you wind up at a conference, you wind up at some nightclub with loud music where no one's really having that much fun. I mean, in Brazil, you probably have fun, but in North America, it's just a bunch of dudes like standing there. And so I kind of hate nightclubs. But one time I was forced into this nightclub on one of these trips, and I was trying my best to look excited, I guess. And I was looking at the floor, and they had these crazy lights, and I saw, all these neat shadows, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. And so I took a picture of it, and I thought about it for a while, and I decided that I would take some of this older circular collision code that I had written and try and recreate these interesting lights that I had seen in this club. And I started out by just sketching it. So this was just by hand in Flash, kind of trying to figure out how would I create the shadows that I want to create using vectors. And once I had that, I started to write code that would do it. And the end result was this, which I'll just let run. Again, music, so I'll step out of the way. Oops, sorry, one sec.
Was wird daraus, wenn der Bruno mal tot geht? Wo landen diese Sachen? Wo landen diese Instrumente? Was wird daraus?
So building that was way more fun than hanging out in a club with a bunch of dudes. So even when you're bored or when you're not having fun, you can still be inspired. And then I think this is the most obvious one to many of us, but we can definitely be inspired by the tools and technology as they come out. I've been really hankering to play around with the Kinect. I haven't had time yet, but that's something that's really inspiring me right now, watching people do cool stuff with it. But it doesn't have to be just with the technology that you're comfortable with. In fact, it's best if you go out and play with stuff that you're really not used to. And so a few months ago, I guess almost a year ago now, we were approached by Microsoft, and they basically said, we really like the work that you do in Flash. We'd love to see what you can do with HTML5. And they gave us a budget, and they said, go build a cool game using HTML5. And so we sat down and we did some brainstorming, and we came up with this idea for a game called Pirates Love Daisies. And this is all in HTML5. It looks very much like a Flash game. We have high scores. We have a bunch of different maps and different game modes. And basically, you just create pirates, and your pirates shoot at bad guys who come and they try and steal your daisies and take it back to the water. And ultimately, this was really very successful from Microsoft's standpoint. They were really happy with it. It got quite a bit of attention. But what was more interesting to me was kind of pushing into this new technology and seeing how JavaScript worked. I hadn't played with JavaScript in years, And it was kind of neat to come back to it. And it didn't just open up a whole new avenue for my interactive expression. Like, it wasn't just another way that we could build things for clients, which was important, but it also got me rethinking how I do some of the work that I do. And it started to influence the way I look at some of the APIs that I'm building for ActionScript 3. So again, I think it's really critical to get out of sort of your comfort zone with technology and play around with other technologies and see how that's going to influence how you work with stuff that you're more comfortable with. No matter how much inspiration you keep stored away in your little inspiration box, it's still not going to be a constant. I really find that for me, creativity is something that ebbs and flows, that comes and goes. I'll sometimes go a whole year without really feeling very creative. In fact, I would say about 2 years ago, I went through a period where I didn't feel like I was really interested in the work that I was doing that much. I didn't really want to play with the technology anymore, and I kind of stepped back from it a little bit. And I think that you have to learn to be patient with that, because it'll generally re-spark. But you have to be able to differentiate between just a gap in your creativity or a postponement of your creativity and genuine complacency, where it's more of a conscious thing, where you have ideas, but you don't feel like pursuing them, or you don't have ideas and you just don't even feel like trying to find them. I think that if you aren't a little bit stressed about the fact that your creativity has gone away, that's a great sign that you're complacent. And often it feels very comfortable to be complacent. It feels very comfortable to not do anything, because there's so much less risk when you're not putting yourself out there and doing something that's really new and different. So how do we fight that complacency? How do we maintain momentum so that we keep doing creative things and have fun with the work that we're doing? I think there's a lot of tactics that we can employ. I think one of the biggest things for me is not trying to tackle really big things, not letting these big ideas weigh me down and stress me out, and because it's really easy to walk away from something that you don't feel like you'll ever be able to complete. Whereas if you break things down into very small pieces and tackle them one little piece at a time, you get this ongoing sense of achievement, right? You feel like you're moving towards something, and you can be proud of these little steps. And this idea of micro deadlines, like small things that you accomplish, one thing a day, is something that I do personally, and it's also something that I really enforce inside of my company. Not even encourage, I make my employees do this. When we tackle a project, we break that project down into 1 or 2 day tasks, which makes estimating really easy, but it also means that my employees always have something that they're working on. They always know at the end of the day today, I should be done this. At the end of the day tomorrow, I should be done this. And that's so much easier to manage than saying this project has to be done in 3 months or in 6 months. And it also gives us instantaneous feedback on how we're doing on a project. Right away, 2 days into the project, we can know, oh no, we've missed our first 2 micro deadlines. We're already in trouble. We need to add staff, or we need to let the client know that there might be problems. Also, if you break your projects down into very small pieces, it means that you can reward small successes instead of just celebrating when you complete the whole large project. So almost every day you can reward yourself for accomplishing something. And that might just be a pat on the back. It might be getting to go play some game that you like. Sometimes for me, it's getting to go and experiment, getting to go write code that I just really want to write. One of the roles that I take on in my company is I review contracts, and I hate reviewing contracts. So a lot of the time, I'll say to myself, if you finish reviewing this contract, Grant, then you get to go and write code. My life is exciting. This is actually something that I only recognized that I do very recently, just in the last month or two. I've been doing a lot of JavaScript work, and I bought this program called WebStorm, which is a JavaScript editor. And about 6 weeks after I bought WebStorm, I installed some software updates, and I restarted my computer, and I started up WebStorm, and it said, this software has been expired for 2 weeks. And I was like, what? I've been using this thing constantly. And that was when I realized that I had actually had WebStorm open for 6 weeks straight. I hadn't closed it once since I had bought it. And this is something that I do all the time. If I'm working on a project or I'm working on an experiment, I keep everything related to it open all the time. RAM is super cheap, but ramping up to get into something when you have 15 minutes or 20 minutes to really get something done takes so long, right? You spend 5 minutes just starting up your software, you spend another 5 or 10 minutes trying to figure out where you were in your project. And so I just keep everything open, and that way, you know, I get off a phone call and I have 10 minutes before the next meeting, I can just jump in where I left off and immediately start coding. I can really maximize the productivity and like these spontaneous moments. And I think this has been critical as I've gotten busier running the company and doing conferences and stuff like that. I think this has been critical to letting me continue to produce work that I find interesting. So start for yourself and finish for others. Especially when you're doing self-directed projects. I mean, obviously, if you have a client, you're going to start for your client. But if you're doing self-directed projects, creative projects that just interest you, the trick is to start it for yourself, to do something that you're really interested in, not worry about anyone else. And then as it starts to mature and you start to lose interest in it, to start focusing on other people. So trying to create something that you can share with other people, whether that's a code library or whether that's just putting something that's neat to look at online. And this is kind of what propels me from that sort of initial glow of excitement with a new idea through to actually building something that's worth sharing with the world, is, you know, thinking, how will I make this something that's useful or inspirational or just neat to other people? So this is my twist on Picasso's saying. So smart artists borrow great artists. And this is really about collaboration, right? So there are going to be things that you can't do and that you're not going to be great at. And it's so critical to get in and just start doing cool stuff with other people who can do even cooler stuff and leverage their ability. And this is something traditionally I've been really bad at, but recently I've been trying to teach myself to be better at it. So an example of sort of the last 2 points actually is a project I've been working on called Easel. And Easel was inspired by the work that I did on Pirates Love Daisies. And it's basically the core library that powers the game engine for Pirates Love Daisies. It's a display list that's very similar to ActionScript 3 that runs on Canvas, that runs in HTML5. And it lets you do things that look very Flash-like. So this is, you know, just simple bar graph. It has an interactive model, which is something that Canvas doesn't have natively. You can write simple games. So this is boo, 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 boo. And you can integrate things with the DOM. So this is these arms are inside of Canvas, they're in Easel, and the button, of course, is on the DOM, which I think is really critical when you're looking at HTML work, is how do you integrate these like rich pieces that you can build inside of Canvas with the DOM overall. And so this is something that was really an example of me building something for a specific project and then trying to think through, how do I make this valuable for other people? How can I share this with the world? And there's, you know, sort of the altruistic value of that, of just helping other people out, but there's also the promotional value because it helps to position you as an expert in your field. If other people are using your libraries, then it helps to establish you as an expert. My wife forces me to show this one. So I'm horrible with like Valentine's Day and anniversaries and that kind of crap. So this last Valentine's Day, I totally forgot about it, and And then my calendar came up and alerted me, and I was like, ah, crap, what do I do? So I was in the middle of coding easel, and so I was like, oh, I'll build something with what I know. And so this is an old Amiga trick from the Amiga demo days called infinite bobs, where there's only about 20 actual hearts that are going up the screen, but every frame I'm capturing them back onto a rotating series of bitmaps. And so the longer it runs, the more hearts you get. And so if it runs forever, you get infinite hearts animating up the screen. And so I figured hearts, that's pretty good. Now if I throw in like a little bit of poetry, then I'll really be doing good. So this says, the longer I'm with you, the more I love you. Yeah, aw. My wife is here, so the louder you aw, the better I do. But I actually, it's true. I've been with my wife for 15 years, and I love her deeply. But I liked the sort of poetry of it, where it's, the longer you watch it, the more hearts you see, and the longer I'm with you, the more I love you. I thought there was like a nice parallel there. I don't know what the point of that was, other than me getting kudos. And so it's funny because I've been working in this industry for over 10 years. I know these amazingly brilliant guys. We always talk with each other about how we should collaborate on building stuff, and we never do. And then when I started working on easel, suddenly we were all collaborating. Mike Chambers has been helping me out a ton with easel. Brandon Hall has been working with it and giving feedback. Mario Klingemann, Quasimondo, is doing filters. Tim Nip from the Papervision team is working with it and giving feedback. And it's just so bizarre to me to suddenly be stuck in this situation where I'm working with these other guys, and it took HTML5 to bring us all together. But it's also been interesting from the perspective that I've never tried to run an open source project correctly before. I've always just written my code, cleaned it up, tried to make it useful to other people, put it out there, and sort of forgotten about it. And this project is the first project that I'm really using GitHub. I'm really trying to run it as a proper open source project. And I think it's something that all developers should try and do at least once, so that you get this sense of how to collaborate effectively and how to manage input from a bunch of different people. I think building tools as a craftsman or as an artist, and I really think that all developers are highly creative. I think it's a very creative industry. I think that we're all craftsmen to some extent. Some of us are artists, not myself, but I think there are some people that I would consider artists as coders. I think as a craftsman, you can learn so much about what you do by building your own tools. When my grandfather passed away about 5 years ago, we went down into, he was a carpenter, and we went down into his workshop, and it was really amazing to see all these tools that he built for himself to suit specific needs that the off-the-shelf tools didn't quite meet the way he wanted them to. And I just thought about how much he learned by building those tools for himself, and how he was able to facilitate his own workflow by creating his own tools. And as software developers, we're in an industry where that's so easy. We can create our own tools to make our own lives easier. And so I build a lot of tools. I think between myself and my company, we probably released 9 or 10 different tools to the industry that get used in varying degrees. A couple of the more recent ones, which I'll show you quickly, we released a tool called Zoe, and we built this tool initially for the Pirates Love Daisies game. We needed some way that our animators could create character art, and we could get it into use in HTML5 and inside of easel. And so we built this tool just for ourselves that let us drag in, sorry, Flash, go away. Oh. Go away. So we built this tool that basically let us just bring in any SWF, and it would export a sprite sheet, and it would export some data that we could use inside of easel. And so this is, I mean, kind of a bad example, but you can kind of see, these are the different sequences, and it actually output data that let us know what all those sequences were, so that we could say things like go to and play attack down right. And so when we finished the project, and we had a little bit of free time, we went back and we cleaned this up and we released it for free to the community so that other people could follow that same workflow. And it's been fairly popular. And it lets you do stuff like, it actually scrapes all the labels from the animations so that I can see, what does attack right look like. And so it'll actually export all of these different things. Something a little bit newer that I haven't released at all yet, in fact, I've only been recently talking about it at conferences, is, again, I'm really focused on how do I utilize our existing workflow to create HTML5 content. And so I created this panel, the easel.js export panel. And basically, I can take an FLA, I can say where I want it to output to, where it should export the images to. It'll actually dump all the images out of the library, and where the easel library is going to live. And then I can hit the export button, and I'm just going to show you that I'm not cheating here. So it's going to export into this folder, which right now just has the easel.js file in it. And if I hit export, this is now in HTML5 in easel.js. And it generates code that's actually fairly readable. So these are the image preloads. It handles the preloading. When the preloading is done, it creates symbols. So it'll actually maintain symbols. So for example, there's the sun symbol out of the library, and then it creates the content. So for example, you can see down here, these are all the instances of the sun. So it's creating a clone of the sun and then putting it on stage. And so this is something that I'm planning to release at some point in the not too distant future. But again, just a way of, this is building a tool to make your own workflow better, so you don't have to do all the boring crap that you have to do in day-to-day work. So, don't tell your bosses I told you this. So I've been coding for a long time, and I often get quite bored when I have to write code. And so one way that I maintain my interest in it is I will invent new challenges and I'll impose arbitrary limits. So I'll do stupid things. Don't even tell yourself to do this, but I'll do stupid things like write a series of 7 or 8 different classes without ever compiling to see if I can write them all perfectly and compile them with one try. And that challenge of trying to make it all work on the first time keeps me interested in it so that I can get it done. Likewise, sometimes I'll do experiments around just arbitrary limits that don't really have anything to do with reality. So this is actually quite old, but this was a old, really crappy game that I built, which has like levels and score and stuff like that. And it's a very simple, boring game. But the interesting thing about it is that it is less than 1 kilobyte. And so I actually spent a lot of time like figuring out how Swift is compressed and what makes it get larger and what doesn't, and how I could reuse chunks of code. And little experiments like that make you sort of rethink how you approach some of the things that you thought you knew. Become obsessed. If you like something, dig into it. I have a few themes that run over and over again in my work. One of them, for example, is vines or branches. I love recursion. And the danger of recursion is it can be hard to exit. And so I find myself revisiting things like trees and vines and veins and stuff like that over and over and over again as these things that I play with. When new technology comes out, I'll often find a way to like work it back into an old experiment. And I don't know, I obsess about this stuff for some bizarre reason. This, for example, when the new text engine came out in Flash, I was like, oh, what would be better? What would it be a better use of the text engine than drawing a tree with text? It seems natural. So yeah, I mean, find things that you like and just immerse yourself in them. Just push them and push them and push them. Find ways to apply them to things that you don't like necessarily. You know, new technologies, new APIs, things that you want to explore. Find a way to bring your passions into those things. I talked a little bit about, you know, exploring new technologies, which is one way of sort of getting out of what you know, but also, you know, sort of breaking out of your box. Danny Dura talked earlier about how we're entering this era now of computing where we're getting out of the box literally. We're starting to step away from the keyboard and mouse and find new ways to interact with these devices. And I think he's completely right about that. And it's something that I really hadn't played around with at all until maybe about a year ago. And then I forced myself to sit down and start thinking about it and start playing with it and building things. And I'm going to show you some of the results of that. So one of the first things that I started playing with, I started playing around with mobile devices. And I'm really interested in multi-screen, but not so much from the sense of how do we take a experience and put it in a distinct way onto different devices. I'm more interested in, if I have many of these devices, how can I come up with an even better experience, right? So not just the same experience on different devices, but an aggregate experience, an experience that combines these devices to make it better. And so this is my first sort of exploration into it. It's my latest project with Air 2. I have an Air application running on the desktop, and I also have a Air client that's running on my Nexus 1. And when I connect the two of them, the desktop is going to send a Surface SWF over to my mobile client, which will dictate what the game will look like on the mobile device. So I'll connect. And you can see that I'm now in the game. And I can control everything that's going on in the game just using my Nexus 1. And if we take a look at it, you can see that I can control my thrust by sliding my thumb up and down the left side, and I can shoot by pressing on the right side. And you can see that I also get a first-person view of everything that's going on in the game. This game also supports multiple players. The current version supports up to 8 players. And so you can see that someone else has just joined, and we can shoot at each other and ultimately blow each other up. The game is also smart enough that if everyone disconnects from the game, it'll automatically pause itself and it'll wait for the next people to join.
Oh, yeah, 10,000 for hit.
Thanks. So this is 6 people playing it. This was a lot of fun to build. It was actually something that came together really quickly once I decided to do it. This is kind of one of the benefits of working in my company, is that I go out and do stupid stuff, and then all my employees get to like play for half a day to see if it works. So kind of the interesting thing about this is that I did this purely for myself. I just did it because I wanted to see if it was something that I could do, and because I was interested in the technology. And when I put a video of this up on Vimeo, by the next day I had already gotten about 60 or 70,000 views on it. And by the end of the day, I already had 2 different game companies contact me about building something for them based on this idea. So this kind of like self-exploration can really drive into real work. It can really create opportunities for you to do the types of work that you want to do, not just the types of work that people come to you with. So once I had started this, I also decided that I was going to start playing with this set of fidgets that we had in our office. And fidgets are these hardware breakout devices where you can plug them into USB and you can control stuff that's external to your computer. And we actually had a potential client come to us and say, we really want to let people race slot cars over the internet, but we're not sure if we have the budget. And so I was like, well, I don't care. I'm building this thing whether you guys have the budget or not. I'm just going to go out and build it. And ultimately, they didn't have the budget. But the next day, the day after the client called, I went to the hobby store and I bought a slot car track. And I sat down in the office that morning. And by about lunch, I had it so that I could control the track with the computer. And by the end of the day, I had started to combine it back with the experiment that I just showed you to create something fun but completely useless. So I'll show you another video.
I wanted to share a little project that I've been working on. I built this desktop air application that opens a socket on my local network, and it waits for this little Air for Android application to connect to it. And when it does, the desktop application sends a Surface Swift to it, which defines what it's going to look like and how it's going to act. So you can see in this case it sent it a Swift that makes it look like a gas pedal, and if I tilt my phone, you can see that in the desktop app it's receiving that accelerometer data and it's interpreting it. It's actually sending some data back to the phone to update its UI and display those little LEDs. And if I follow this USB cable off the side of my laptop, you'll see that it connects into this Fidget's motor control, and the Fidget's motor control in turn connects into the bottom of this slot car racing track. And if I move my car back onto the track and grab my phone, then you can see that when I tilt my phone, it actually controls the speed of the car going around the track. And so I figured it would be a little bit more fun if I built this harness with some elastic bands and some screws, and I made it so that you can just slide your Nexus 1 in there, and then you have a proper gas pedal that you can use to race your car. Kind of fun.
So, I mean, obviously a fantastic use of technology. Take a $50 slot car track, add about $3,000 worth of hardware to it, and you can drive your car. But what was kind of funny about this is that I put the video up, and about a month later, we actually had another potential client get in touch with us and say, we want to have a system where you can drive a real car through the internet, and we think you're the guys to do it, because obviously if you can drive slot cars through the internet, you can drive real cars. And we actually wound up being the front runner for the project through almost the entire bidding process, based largely on this piece. And we wound up losing the project because one of the other agencies built a car that they could drive through the internet. So they obviously wanted it a lot more than I did. But you can actually, the project actually went live a few months ago, but sadly we didn't do it. So the last big point that I want to make, and this seems obvious, but it's so critically important, is that if you want to continue to do cool work and you don't want to burn out at your job and you want to be creative, you have to be having fun with it, right? You have to be passionate about what you're doing. You can't produce awesome work when you're just getting by, when you're just doing the work that you have to do. And this means that you have to choose topics that you're interested in and that you can play around with. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of a continuation again of this series of experiments. This was another like 2-hour experiment. Everything was already set up, and I figured, what would happen if we connected microphones to all of this? So this is racing using car engine noises.
my trusty slot car setup and hooked into a fidgets motor control, controlled by a couple of simple Swift applications and a couple of willing volunteers who are going to race using race car noises.
So a pro tip related to this, you see the Lego right there? That Lego doesn't do anything, but this is marketed at nerds, right? And like, I fucking love Lego. So I put Lego in the video, and like half the comments on these videos are like, wow, it uses Lego, that's awesome. So know your audience. We also have Jack Daniels, which I'm not sure if that's the same audience or not, but yeah. So anyway, can I pause that? Sweet. So I kind of got, tired of doing slot car racing, and I was like, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna find some new toys that I can play with. And so I wound up going to a toy store, and I shopped all through it, trying to find something cool that was battery controlled that I could hook up and like do neat stuff with. And I was totally disappointed. Kids these days don't play with cool toys. They play with like video games and stuff like that, which, all right, that's fine. But I went away kind of bummed, and I was like, well, man, what am I gonna use this technology for? And then I was walking around downtown in my city, and I walked by this store. And I was like, I'll bet you they have things that use batteries. And it turns out that they do. They actually have quite a selection of things that are controlled with batteries. And so if you're ever really bored and you want to do something kind of entertaining, I highly recommend going to one of these stores, bring a multimeter, and ask the guy at the desk if he has anything that draws less than 1 amp, that looks good on camera, but isn't too offensive. The guy who worked here, I think he was about 70 years old. He'd probably worked there since like World War II. And I think I creeped him out, which is pretty awesome. So anyway, so I bought some stuff. And I built the world's first biofeedback personal massager. And I will demonstrate it to you now. This here, the little pink bunny, that's our active device.
Oh, God. Oh, you're right there. Oh, God. Oh, yes, 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 yes. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Oh, yes, 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 yes. Oh, God. Oh.
I'll have what she's having.
So, I mean, I'm going to be rich, right? That goes without saying. My wife's in the audience, so I'm not going to embarrass her by saying whether or not she tested this, but but she definitely is much more interested in my work these days. So, do things that you can have fun with. And that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you very much. And I'll definitely be hanging out at the networking event later on, so I'd love to chat with people. It's always cool, you know, meeting Flash developers and creative people all over the world, so thanks.
Perguntas?
I guess I'm
Perguntas? Maybe not.
I can show them a couple more random things if they want.
No, yeah, I gotta stop. It's just that if they have any question. Perguntas?
Hi, Grant. Wow, this is loud. You code to take pictures. What else do you do that inspires you?
So the question is, I code, I take pictures. What else inspires me? Is that right? I don't know, life in general. I think, again, movies I find really interesting. Nature in general, I talked about that. I don't know. I think I kind of covered it. Yeah, just everything. I really try to be very childlike in my ability to be odd. I still am amazed every time I take off in an airplane, for example. Just the fact that I'm in something that's flying. I mean, I just still find that phenomenal. So yeah, everything.
Hi, hello. You mentioned at the beginning that you were inspired by a store in Manhattan. Can you tell us what was it?
It was a comic book store. So, should I share this? I'll share it because that way I'm forced to try and do something with it one of these days. So I had this idea, sort of related to the art piece that I showed that I've been working on. For looking at where you can get interesting art, and I was thinking comic books have this really fantastic graphical nature to them, and all of the pieces of art tend to be stroked with dark black strokes. And so I think it would be fairly easy to write a little extraction program where I can scan or take pictures of comic books and have it automatically extract chunks of art sort of out of context, and then use that art to recreate other pictures and stuff like that, use it as a source for other images. So hopefully I get some time to build it.
Mais uma pergunta, só mais uma para a gente poder encerrar.
Oi? Você abordou aí que passa por momentos sem criatividade, tipo, passou um ano sem estar naquele momento criativo, sem ter criatividade. Hoje, para quem está começando e que depende dessa criatividade, como gerenciar essa falta dela? Porque, tipo, quem está começando é inviável passar um ano sem produzir. Como é que a pessoa se sustenta nesse ano?
Well, so hopefully, I mean, I've been working in this space for 10 or 15 years, so so you get bored eventually, and I think that was sort of why I felt very uncreative for a year. But again, I think you don't need amazing ideas to be creative. You need to start with small ideas that are just interesting to you. They don't have to be fantastic or phenomenal. I mean, I don't start with cool things moving around screen. I start with a very small kernel of an idea, and then you expand on it, and you take it, you build just the little piece that you know, and then you maybe build another piece over here, and another piece over here, and then you start to think, how do these things connect? How can I do something else with them? And they start to grow, and the more things like that you build, the more things you can build, and the more you'll be inspired to build. I think also, you know, the whole idea of disassembling things, breaking things into smaller pieces, that doesn't just apply to actually building new things. It also applies to finding things that inspire you. So looking at a forest, and then looking at the tree, and then looking at the branch, and looking at the flower, and looking at the petal, and trying to find which part of that inspires you, and which part of it you can recreate, and which part of it you can reuse in your own work, as opposed to just looking at these huge ideas and trying to figure out how you can get there.
Obrigada.
Thank you, Grant.